Think back to a morning when the front door stayed on the latch, not the lock, and nobody worried. Coins were left neatly on the corner shop counter, trusted to be counted later. Children wandered the street until tea time, their names carried home on familiar voices rather than alarms. It wasn't careless, it was normal. Britain once moved on quiet confidence, an unspoken belief that most people would do the right thing. Today, that idea feels startling. So when did we begin double-checking, bolting, and watching? The answer isn't a single moment, but a slow turning we noticed at first. A country held together by unspoken rules didn't announce itself as special at the time. It simply felt like life. In the years after the war, Britain was tired, but together, rationing had taught patience, rebuilding taught cooperation, and fairness was learned at the kitchen table. You queued without complaint, returned borrowed items promptly, and kept an eye on the neighbor's house without being asked. Trust wasn't discussed because it didn't need to be. It lived in habits. Shopkeepers knew names, not accounts. Children learned boundaries from the street itself. If someone fell ill, casseroles appeared without arrangement. Privacy existed, but so did responsibility. These neighborhoods worked like extended families, stitched together by routine and familiarity. Everyone understood the rules, though none were written down. You didn't take what wasn't yours. You helped when you could. And if you broke trust, you felt it immediately in the silence that followed. Looking back, it seems fragile, almost impossible. Yet for decades it held, quietly shaping daily life, setting the stage for moments we'd later miss. Those assumptions, once invisible, would slowly fade, leaving us wondering how something so ordinary became something we now talk about in the past with surprise today. Some of the strongest memories from mid-century Britain aren't about big events at all, but tiny routines that quietly depended on trust. You remember the corner shop ledger, a stubby pencil behind the ear, a name written down with a nod. No fuss, no forms, just the understanding that things would be settled on Friday. Today, that idea feels almost daring. Children were sent out with a note and a few coins, asked to fetch bread or stamps, their footsteps echoing on pavements polished smooth by years of use. They knew which doors to knock on, which gardens to avoid, and when to be home. The street itself felt like a safety net, woven from familiar faces and watchful eyes. Neighbors kept spare keys, not in safes, but in biscuit tins. Offered with a smile just in case, washing lines crisscrossed shared yards, radios murmured through open windows, and everyone recognized everyone else's routines. If something was amiss, it was noticed. These moments worked because honesty was assumed. You didn't question it. You relied on it. And perhaps that's why, looking back, they feel so vivid. They belonged to a rhythm of life that didn't announce itself as special, yet now makes us pause and think. Quietly, you couldn't do that today. And it was in these ordinary scenes, barely remarked upon at the time, that the foundations of everyday trust were laid. Foundations that would later begin to shift as Britain itself slowly changed around us altogether then. As the 1970s rolled in, the rhythms of everyday life that had once been so reliable began to shift, almost imperceptibly. Streets that had once echoed with children's laughter became quieter as families moved further apart, and the familiar nod from a neighbor became less common. People still smiled, still greeted each other politely. But the unspoken assumptions that underpinned everyday interactions were beginning to loosen. Shopkeepers who had kept a mental tally of unpaid items found it harder to trust strangers in larger, impersonal stores. Communities grew larger and more transient. Neighbors no longer knew each other's routines or faces as well. The media, too, began to cast a spotlight on rare but sensational breaches of trust, subtly reshaping public perception. Reports of theft, scams, or even simple misunderstandings made people pause before leaving coins on a counter or a door unlocked. Trust didn't vanish in one dramatic moment. It ebbed slowly, like a tide drawing back from a familiar beach. And with each small shift, routines quietly adapted. Children were asked to stay closer to home, errands were accompanied, and spare keys were tucked safely away. What had once been second nature, the assumption that honesty and care underpinned society, was now measured and cautious. The fabric of communal life remained, but its threads were thinner, more deliberate. Everyday acts that depended on implicit trust became rare, and in their absence, a subtle longing grew for the Britain that had once been a world that had quietly, slowly, begun to slip away. There's a soft ache when we recall those days, not for the things we owned, but for the ease of life itself. The comfort of knowing a neighbor would watch your house without being asked, or that a child could cycle freely to the corner shop without worry, feels almost like a dream today. These were small, quiet assurances, simple gestures that required nothing but honesty and care. They created a rhythm, a sense of belonging, a shared understanding that life was safer, warmer, somehow more human. We can almost hear the clink of coins left on a shop counter, smell the fresh bread from the local bakery, and see the familiar faces nodding along the street. It wasn't perfect. There were disagreements and mistakes, but trust smoothed the edges of everyday life. Remembering this Britain reminds us not only of what was lost, but of the enduring value of kindness and connection, a gentle lesson that still resonates even in a more cautious modern world. Today, many of those old rhythms seem almost impossible. Children are accompanied everywhere, doors are locked, and coins rarely sit unattended on counters. Yet traces of that trust remain in local markets where shopkeepers still greet familiar faces, in neighborhoods where kindness quietly persists, and in the small courtesies we extend to one another. Reflecting on the past, we realize how much was built on simple faith in each other, and how, even now, moments of trust can surprise us. The Britain of unlocked doors may be gone, but its spirit endures, quietly reminding us that connection is never entirely lost. It's only when we look back that we see what slipped quietly from our daily lives. That gentle confidence, that sense that people around us were reliable, that streets and shops were safe by default, was a subtle treasure we hardly noticed. Running errands, borrowing sugar from a neighbor, or leaving a note on the kitchen table felt effortless because trust filled the spaces in between. Every interaction carried an unspoken understanding. We looked out for one another, and life moved with a reassuring predictability. Today, those moments feel almost fragile. Familiar faces are fewer, kindness is measured, and small courtesies are sometimes met with caution rather than ease. What we lost was not grand or dramatic, but the quiet certainty that came from knowing the world, our communities, and the people around us could be trusted. Remembering this reminds us how deeply human trust shapes everyday life and belonging. In today's Britain, convenience and technology shape our routines, yet something of that old, effortless trust feels missing. Doors are locked, errands are planned, and neighborhoods often feel more like passing points than extended families. Still, small acts of faith endure: a friendly smile, a neighbor returning a forgotten parcel, a shopkeeper greeting a regular customer. They remind us that trust hasn't vanished. It's simply quieter, more intentional. Reflecting on the past, we can choose to nurture these moments, reclaiming a sense of connection in our own lives, and perhaps rediscovering that Britain built on trust isn't entirely lost.